So, first of all, I am so honored to be here today, and I'm so honored to see you here, so many people coming from different continents for this very special moment. I hope we can all learn from the desert together. Water has more than 70 properties that differentiate it from any other liquid on Earth. As of today, scientists have no coherent model to understand and interpret those abnormal properties. What we do know is water is one of the most abundant elements of the universe, born practically with it 13 billion years ago. We also know that planet Earth is one of the only planets we know where it is present under its liquid form, which is the only form that can contain and carry an infinite number of molecules and allow complex chemical reactions to happen between them to create life. In fact, life on Earth happened precisely at the same time water reached its liquid form for the first time. It seems that water not only allows life to happen, but it makes it almost unavoidable. Every drop of water we drink is older than our planet and our sun. 70% of our human bodies are made of one of the most ancient and powerful substances that was ever created in our universe. And yet, our societies have turned it into a product ready to be extracted, carried through a constantly growing number of infrastructures until it reaches human societies that are reduced to being consumers of resources instead of being actors of territory. According to the United Nations World Water Development Report of 2020, the volume of water withdrawn from domestic, agriculture, and industrial use has increased more than sixfold since the beginning of the 20th century. More than 2 billion people suffer from water shortage every year. And the World Meteorological Organization reports that in 2023, the world's rivers experienced their worst drought in 3 decades, threatening the water security of 3.6 billion people for at least 1 month. The UN estimates that this figure could reach 5 billion people by 2050. Europe itself is not spread. In 2019, 38% of its population was affected by water shortages. These figures show that this is no longer a problem confined to a few arid regions, but a global crisis that we must collectively face. This water crisis is not solely the result of climate change. It has been exacerbated by the productivist logic that guided water management through the 20th century. This logic is part of a modernistic vision inherited from the colonial paradigm and the industrial revolutions, that of an infinite growth supported by the unlimited exploitation of natural resources. As Isabelle Stengers notes in her essay Au temps des catastrophes, Time of Disaster, this development believed itself entitled to ignore its consequences, seeing only new sources of profit. From Spain to the United States, from Iran to India, large dams, transfer canals, intensive irrigated agriculture, and urban sprawl bear witness to this fantasy of total control over water flows. The standardization of these infrastructures imposed on territory with radically different hydrographies has certainly led to spectacular economic growth and undeniably improved living conditions for humans, but it has also disrupted vital balances, depleted groundwater, displaced populations, and accelerated desertification. But unlike what we tend to think in water-rich Western world, desert does not mean no water or emptiness. It means scarcity of water. This scarcity demands extreme ingenuity, remarkable inventiveness, patient observation, and adaptation to the structure of the territory. For 2 days, we will hear about how millennial civilizations of the desert could design the most remarkable water structures capable of transforming the fragility of arid territories into opportunities for a deep understanding of how the water cycle functions and securing it instead of creating unsolvable ruptures. I am more than honored to welcome our first panel, coming from no less than 4 continents in the world. Let's hear them and let's together learn from the desert. Thank you. So I'm calling our first speaker, Marc Brabant, please.
First of all, I'm very flattered, but also very intimidated to be the first speaker at this conference. I've been asked to open the speech. I'm going to take this opportunity to give you some idea about the idea of catastrophes and the collapsing of the world, because I think that it underpins the theme that we are discussing. By way of introduction, I'm going to read you a short text in relation to my exhibition called Arcadia. This is an extract from Apocalypse, which was the world of the first man. In Greek, katakismos means flooding. This exhibition was devoted to be in part. Here's the text. The waters rose. They swallowed up civilizations as they do from time to time. The ephemera, having fallen out of love with themselves and angry with the idea of the world they had created, rejoiced at the idea of the end. They do everything they can to bring about the flood. They strive to perish collectively. They work to rid the world of themselves with great floods. Other ephemera will appear, grow, make a racket, and then disappear in turn. The first man, from the top of his Arcadian mountains, marvels at his freedom. I'd like to put a number of environmental catastrophes into perspective. To my mind, there's something cyclical about the idea of the end of the world, which goes well beyond the current mal-être. Floods are part of the mythology of the first writings in humanity. Today, as from time to time in history, waters rise and land dries. Coastal cities disappear. New York and Venice have erected protections, but later they will be, like all humanity, flooded. We work everywhere to manage catastrophes, and we struggle. This is the inevitable end. It seems that we are awaiting this inevitable end. It seems sometimes that we even want it to happen. This world does not welcome us anymore. We see ourselves as criminals, inevitably guilty and unwelcome. Through our own fault, the temperature of our planet is rising. Icebergs, ice caps are melting. A lot of humanity will disappear. Our daily activities and systematically the increased consumption of forestry, petrol, water will lead us all to inevitable disaster and to our own end. Our imagination of the end of the world is, I think, more serious than the rising of waters by a few inches. This vision of the end echoes a myth that goes back thousands of years, which I think is highly significant and may go some way to explaining, at least I feel it might explain or go some way to explaining our inability to react. The oldest stories in history, in cuneiform in Babylonia, already talk about the end. In Mesopotamia, the people who were disliked by the gods, also unhappy with themselves, felt guilty about their very existence. In their own existence, they found that there was an error, a mistake, that they were simply resisting, being resilient. Ephemerous, but embodying the very principles of life. Human beings regenerate and reproduce themselves, which is a problem. Another extract I'd like to read you. Like a bull, the sovereign God was disrupted by the noise. When Enlil spoke to the God, he said, "The noise from human beings has become too loud. I can't sleep with all this rattling noise," said the God. Order an epidemic. During this time, humans, resilient as ever, resisted. Their vitality resisted. They continued to reproduce and make more noise and to increase their activity. The gods were irritated and felt obliged to bring about a drought, famine, and ultimately flooding. Ultimately, I quote, "Men filled the sea as flies fill the rivers." The purpose of the myth is probably to explain to human beings the cause of cataclysms, their own finiteness, and to teach them humility. The flooding signifies the end of the world, physical end of the world, more certainly, but almost more certainly the spiritual end of the world. In this great cleansing by the waters, there is certainly something that enables us to reset, start from scratch. The flooding is a way of looking at an end that is the possibility of a restart. Everything is perishable, but the possibility of radical change exists. So the freedom to think, to dream, to hope should remain intact. In its laws, Plato makes of this a cycle of history. For cities and civilizations from the cradle to the grave, this will inevitably take the route of deprivation, depravity. This will disappear with the end. Cities being situated on the plains and coasts where it's completely demolished. The cycles of the world thus proposed go from complex societies to the end of the world through flooding with a rebirth. The explanation of depravity, which generates drought and catastrophes of all sorts, comes finally from the complexity or complexification of increasingly populated cities. In these myths, there's a sketch of the theory of collapsing of societies. Zeus, the god of gods, who reigns, according to Plato, this is in the last lines of Critias, understands because he had the power to understand these things, had the capacity to understand the importance of depravity. Sooner or later, with the accumulation of wealth and the multiplication of efforts to ordain and control, this inevitably leads to collapse. The Atlantide was sunk for these very same reasons. Now again, as this necessarily happens from time to time, at least it would appear that we have deserved it. From the Ganesh in Babylon, Plato, the Bible, Rousseau, there's a regular cycle in mythology about the ideas of progress, disaster, and a return to the origins. Our world in its various aspects is collapsing. Our observations of disaster are values that we can no longer maintain, and for this very reason no longer suit us. At the same time, we deplore the apocalypse that we're creating, but we reject our world and look forward to the world to come. Since the pandemic, we've been talking about the pre-pandemic period, something's been lost, and the world after the pandemic. However, this does not yet exist. We simply desire it. This is a world that we are in a hurry that we are to be rid of. It's no longer a world because of that. From the very moment we announce the end of the world and we lose faith in the world we had, it can no longer exist. This lost world, this loss of oneself, is what he calls cosmicity. This generates preventions in at least two fundamental ways. First of all, there's the loss of the present tense, which prevents transcendency, satisfaction in the present moment. Life is reduced to necessities and devoid of sense and substance. Mechanical technocracy and take more and more decisions in a very predetermined way, independent of our experience, or even substitutes our ability to choose and our ability to self-determine. In practice, this is unfortunately one of the great dangers of this engineering, or the so-called artificial intelligence. It's the possibility of abandoning the responsibility of our decisions to processes that we do not control. We will no longer have any pleasure in the individual adventure of life, of existence. In this cycle, there's a loss of a future. Faced with the loss of the world, there's a protective nostalgia and a former order that's illusory and fantastic. We end up defying the inevitable, we end up fearing everything, particularly change and progress. This is a progress that's well described in the literature about the construction of reality. The real life becomes petrified and we are no longer aware of what is possible. And yet, ideally, the end does not signify the disappearance of life, but the concern about inventing agencies in which it will become possible without fearing the worst.
Alors, de quoi la fin est-elle la fin?
So in what way is the end of all things? Existentially, this is based on the idea of projection, the idea that we will continually to renew ourselves by way of happy tomorrows. Pierre Targès has, I think, shown well the cult of the future and the belief in progress are the two pillars on which our beliefs are founded in modern times. Today, everything has been reversed. We can no longer refer to progress as things that are ultimately causing our loss. Our world is the problem, and we do not have any fallback solutions. Everything that drove us is being pulled from under our feet. Everything material is becoming a problem and is no longer available or even enviable. The entrepreneurial spirit, our ability to control everything right up to the possibility of survival escapes us. We have killed off the principle of hope and end up disconsolate, powerless, faced with our inevitable end. Worse again, we know that anything we can do will only accelerate our disappearance. Our relationship with existence, ideology, and the ideas underpinning them prove to be inadequate. The materialistic ideology has become a techno-materialistic ideal that alienates us. This has become inoperative as a system that explains the world. Worse again, we are applying a system of values that maintains a suicidal and destructive dynamic by way of its dogmatism. It prevents us from imagining alternatives that we could aspire to. Limited by rationalism and positivism, what are the cornerstones of modernity, our way of thinking is in itself a limitation in several ways. First of all, the so-called rational objectivity that has proved illusory. Spiritually, this is inoperative. In particular, when dealing with the various disasters. Techno-solutions, which are now ever present, is probably the most patent marker, one of the most patent marker of the dynamics of mechanical thinking and spiritually disengaged thinking. This process refers to a whole series of problems that can be solved. The ever-present system of control. Because of that, we live systemic, controlled existences. Nothing exists in itself. Everything is subject to the bigger picture. Our society systems, no matter how complex or subjecting that humanity has ever had. So, how do we react when the former world does not suit us and we know nothing about the world to come? Because it will take time to move from the loss to the gain. We just have to change the way we think. And I am convinced, writes aujourd'hui, that there will be a new spiritual revolution taking place, that the time is ripe for that. That, however, may take 3 centuries. So it has become urgent to change our very adventure, and while we're waiting, maybe come back to spirituality, metaphysics, doubt, experimenting everything we can, living everything we can, despite ultimately this techno-material world does no longer offer real solutions. These are situations that we will have to face urgently. How do we liberate ourselves now? How do we become involved in a new civilization project that could prove to be a satisfactory alternative? Well, first of all, we should try to believe again in the order of knowledge in order to be less overwhelmed by the uncertainties. Could we begin by seeking out the human in people to reinvent a relationship with the world that can be renewed and readjusted? In this period of catastrophes, I think we must revolt against the lack of freedom and creativity. We need to spend more time looking at ethics, etiology, and learn to live with generosity. The time to learn to see the world again, to live in the world again, is, I think, a sentence that we have imposed upon ourselves. This is even more true of architecture, which will look after our souls, first of all, by beginning with a freer existence. By way of conclusion, I'd like to read a short text, not unlike the one I began with. This is just after the flood. This is a picture of an arch. Noah's Ark, I should say. The first man marvels, free and in the open air, in the midst of the untouched, in the archaic nature of time and space, in the archaic nature of matter and movement. He discovers everywhere pieces of possible worlds. He rejoices in the obviousness of beauty. What is there is only a jumble of monads and a soup of atoms, mud, brushwood, and landslides. He contemplates, he senses infinite possibilities. This possibility of a new world, I think, will come from architecture, because I believe it's possible to influence the civilizational disasters currently in process. No matter what we do, we must reappropriate the meaning of what we do and be certain to accept our insubmission. Thank you.
Good morning, bonjour. I know only 2 words, bonjour and merci. Sorry for that. So I'll present my presentation in English. Before I start, I would like to, talk about, and also thank you for the opportunity to speak under the theme of water, human and non-human. Before I talk about my topic, I would like to show few structures which are based in Gujarat, different places in Gujarat, which we have been studying or documenting maybe since 3-4 years, which has a lot of ways of water conservation systems from past, like from 17th, 18th century, they have been practicing, and they have been there at multiple places in Gujarat, because in Gujarat, there is a scarcity of water, but they believe in conserving or preserving water and considering water as a part of the culture. They also take water as part of the their cultural and regional values. So these are some structures where where you can see. Do we have a pointer or something? Do we have a pointer or something? Okay, yeah. So if you see this structure, this is part of a temple complex. This is also the same temple complex where there are 100 shrines, and it is believed that these shrines are, conserving or preserving the water, and they have been used for different purpose. These are called step wells. There are two types of, one is helical step well and one is straight step well. Then these are other places across where it is also believed that cities were planned around the water or within the water. So this is a place which is connected to the sea near Gujarat, and there is a temple over here. So the sea connections with the temple. This is also a city and the gate of the city, which is connecting the whole temple complex and all. Then these are other types of structures where you can actually see in this one, where they have put a god to preserve, and take care of the water. This is also one of the water. So there are many water systems which are there in Gujarat. So today I'm going to, and this is one more which has kund, and this is also a step well. So they are like roughly 4 or 5 floors down, and as rain comes, the water is collected into these structures, and it is used by, and it is a potable water as it is a rainwater. So these are some kind of structures which are there across Gujarat. But today I'm going to talk about Virdas. And this is also, sorry for that, but this is also a very old structure of Indus Valley civilization, where it was said that it was made for largely a lot of tanks, and those were made, the drainage systems were made to take care of the water because it has a scarcity of water. So it has been prolonged history, droughts, thus people were aware of the possibilities how consciously practicing water management can be done. So these were some collections of mine which I have been working on. Today I would be talking about Virdas, which so across India, many parts of the world, we are facing difficult mix of climate, groundwater decline, and growing dependence on centralized infrastructure. Even when the pipes reach the village, they do not always contain reliable and clean water around. At the same time, some community-run water systems, they have worked for generation and being ignored and dismissed as old. Thus, question I ask in this talk is the simple: what can we learn from those local systems? Still, they work, and how we can carry the best part of forward without freezing them into the past. Talking about water scarcity problem in arid region have been successfully tackled by water harvesting from the times immemorial, and this focuses on the indigenous rainwater harvesting system locally called Virdas that was evolved centuries ago in Burni grasslands of Kutch, Gujarat, India. Animal husbandry is the major part of the local population, major occupation of local people called Maldharis. Agriculture is not possible due to low rainfall, inherent salinity present in the soil and water. The indigenous water harvesting system is based on traditional knowledge found to be highly effective in sustaining livelihoods of people, life of animal, and success of Virdas evident from the fact that the method developed centuries back is still found in existence and operational. The indigenous technology developed by Maldaris learned over generation based on wisdom of their experience is not only a traditional method, rather it has been embedded into culture. Quality of Virda's water is found suitable for drinking purpose. Thus, Virda is a unique cultural for Maldari community. Moreover, suitable scientific interventions are suggested to integrate with traditional knowledge based indigenous technology for further improvement. To talk about this grassland, Bunny grassland in Kutch district state is in Western India, is a home of numerous plants and animal species across, including bunny buffaloes and Kherarji cows. During princely state, these grasslands were located into the pastoral community to graze and breed animals for which they have paid a grazing tax. So these are the the document which talks about that. And Bunny grassland, once considered as the largest, finest tropical grassland in India, and was declared a protected forest in 1955. Though control over India was never transferred to Forest Department, for Revenue Department, as survey and settlement process was not carried out by concerned authority. Therefore, during princely rule, decision on utilization of management of Bunny grassland as a common was taken by the leaders of pastoral community. There are approximately, the area is around 2,500 kilometers square in Kutch, which is the largest grassland and where temperature is maximum 48 degrees Celsius to 50 degrees Celsius during May and June, and winter's temperature goes to 5 to 8 degrees Celsius during December and January. Average rainfall occurring throughout southwest monsoon between June and September is lowest 317 mm with 65% coefficient of variation. So here there are a lot of species of grasses and birds also, domestic bird like bunny, buffaloes, kheraj, kettles, and many more. So this is a background for how this grassland works and why water is very much important in this grassland. As there are 48 settlements, 40,000 people, 80,000 animals, and they are their main source of economy is the milk or the animal husbandry. So as we go around, Bunny region have these many villages, and in this list of villages there are many virdas which are available, which are made by the Maldhari communities. So if I talk about, there are more than around 150 virdas. So these are the maps. This is a geo map. So there are a lot of these blue dots talk about these villages and how they have made this, different, virdas for their community as well as for their animals. So. The aim to analyze Virda as combined technical and social system and to identify which element can be reused or adapted for climate resilient planning today. The hypothesis is that Virdas can create a hydrosocial contract, a practical agreement between people, place, and more than a human life so that extraction, maintenance, and sharing stays in balance. If we recognize the contract and the support, we can design decentralized water strategies that can be cheaper, fairer, and better matched in the local ecology. To examine this, our study followed simple method based on the approach in Bunny region, and it has 3 parts. The first part talks about site mapping, observation, recorded geels and virdas with GPS sketches based size measurements and positioning, noting local sitting signs and such as thick grass, soil colors, less salt crust, animal tracks. And the second part talks about the guided interview with Maldari elders, which are the main community of that region. The active diggers, so the people, because it is made by the people of the community, it is for themselves. So it is a community activity when they have to create this structure. And the local surveyor documented and how virdas are built, and seasonal routines and shared labor, access rules and taste-based checks for sweet and brackish water. The third part talks about the review of summarized report on bunny ecology, water quality, pH, TDS, and compared with different sources across. And all this evidence then cross-checked and read through three lenses: technical, so how system works; institutional, how it is managed; and ethical, how non-human needs are included and resistance in the practiced areas. So if you can see over here, this is a dry condition of the virdas. So generally they are built on the catchment areas in the villages, and these small pits talks about, this is a zoomed in image, talks about the virdas. So generally they are made with local grasses and the sticks which are available in the region. So these are the construction process. So they dig the jeels around 3 to 4 meters down, almost make it flat, and as you can see over here, there are these small holes or maybe a pit which they are digged more into 3 meters, where they store, because the salinity level is very high over there, so they store water over there. So this is a general map how things work. So this is a village, and near to each village or community who stays in the village, they make this small, as you can see over here or here, these are called, the larger periphery is called jeel, and the dots are called virdas. So they make it in the catchment area, closer to their village, so they can walk down their animals and take the water back to their home, right? So the diameter ranging for 40 to 50 feet or more. These tanks basically act as a catchment areas for the virdas, and similarly the natural tanks, these are also locally called jeels, digging about 15,000 to 30,000 cubic feet of soil to make it large pond. Thus, the catchment areas are also act as a submerged or the storage areas that are capable of storing huge quantity of generated runoff water, and then slowly recharge the groundwater. So these are the construction process. So in every summer, when the water is dried up, they do this process. So construction of virdas is generally completed in 2 days by 4 to 5 people. So, and in order to construct virda, first optimum location inside the jeel is chosen. Then the circular pit is dug. Diameter of the pit is around 6 to 7 feet, and depth is 10 to 15 feet. Then they arrange, so if you can see in this photograph, they arrange the twigs around, and then gradually start covering the virdas with soil. The upper part of the virdas, 0.6 to 1 meter depth, is made of plastered soil, and then during the rainwater, the things are stored. So these are like macro pores in the larger catchment areas. So you can see here the more detailed photographs of that. So this is done by a community only. So every year they practice, they clean the virdas, they make the virdas, they repair the virdas. So once the virdas are done, they do channeling of the water for their cattle. So if you can see over here, they use this channeling method where their cattle can have the water. And as you can see over here, They take out water using, rubber baskets or maybe a leather baskets, which they put it down into the virdas and take out water for their drinking purpose and other purpose. So these are some detailed map of it. So as you can see over here, there are these, holes which are connected to the larger genes, and it is also surrounded by grasses and trees around so that the water evaporation is maintained. This is a general analysis by Central Arid Zone Research Institute, Regional Research Station, Bhuj, Kutch, for analyzing pH, electric conductivity, total dissolved solids, and sodium and chloride, results of the water quality testing present in the table 1. So as you can see, it has, so the bottom ones are the tube water supplies or Narmada water supply, which has pH of 8.01 and 7.53, whereas in Virdas have 7.8 or 7.18 and 7.1 as a pH level. So from this we can actually, see that how much this water is potable for the community and important for them. So this is a filled version of it. So previous pictures were of summers and these pictures are of monsoon. So as you can see, there is a slope over here which takes the water down from the catchment areas, and this is how it is filled in the monsoon time. So the question is now, how do you take care of this, or how do you take it further, or what are the learnings you can take it further? So to keep Virdas working, design, governance and policies are important. These days, the larger pressures and risk are 3 types. Risk includes salination, edge collapse from animal tramping, and mixing with saline water with the extraction is too fast. Social risk also includes youth migration and changing livelihoods that weakens the maintenance and reduce the time of them. Policy and perception risk includes bias from large centralized schemes that labels local systems as backward, causing loss of knowledge and underfunding just as a climate stress rises. This is not a call to return to past, it is a call to carry forward the parts that still works. The main technical principles are simple. Use shallow lens design that favors shallow recharge and many small pits instead of single deep borewell. Keep filtration and water support low, tack by using twigs, grasses mixed with soils, with only small upgrades where truly needed. Build pits in small cluster inside the gill and rotate using each pit can recover and keep water quality high. Governance and policy prioritize are not clear. Keeping management at family or hamlet scale is so simple, rule holds. Put maintenance first with small grants or tools for pre-monsoon distillation, repairs, support routine, and low-cost testing for pH levels. Electric conductivity and total dissolved solids. Display results at the sites. Recognize Virda as an official water asset in watersheds and drought plans with access to microfunding. So largely, this research tries to highlight the maintenance of Virda, enact hydro-social contracts by Bolans, and not only between humans but also with the non-human species and ecological system. Their placement reflects observation of animal behavior, soil seepage, microtypologies, creating water commons that serves both human and animal needs. In this way, the eco with an NR thing calls collaborative survival is disturbed environments, offering infrastructural forms that regenerates rather than exhaust their environment. In conclusion, this paper frames Virdas not merely as a historical artifact, but living model for climate adaptive water futures that prompt us to rethink water not as a commodity or infrastructure, but as a relation entity that mediates between land, climate, community more than a human life, and in doing so, they provide conceptual and practical tools for designing water system that admires ecological thresholds and socio-cultural memories and urgently needed alternative in warming and drying world. Thank you.
Notre région d'études concerne le Khuzestan au sud-ouest.
So our study focused on Khuzestan in eastern Iran. This is a region that covers 3 to 4% of the overall land mass of Iran, 33% of surface water, 7 large dams, which provide 16% of all electricity for the country. These are quite large figures and numbers that we're talking about, and that explains why Khuzestan plays such a central role in general politics, and it also plays a keen historical role. When we look closer at the region, we see 3 types of landscape, or what we call eco-regions, and 3 ways that people use the soil, use the land, and their economies that go hand in hand with it. It all starts back some 8,000 years ago, where there was a considerable progression from people moving from major rivers to the west. In that time frame, at the same time, we also saw the first stages of populations become sedentary and more stable settlement. It's quite interesting because this is a way to understand the overall region, to look at the ties between housing, economy, and water. On the following 2 maps I'm about to show you, we can see the diversity of landscape between the foothills, the tree-covered slopes, and then we have the plains, where we find a lot of archaeological sites, considerable archaeological sites. We also have marshland and sand dunes as we head towards the Persian Gulf. Using archaeological and historical data covering periods from 6,000 years before the Christian era right through to around 650 AD, we can observe an interesting change in the way people interacted with the ground, with soil. And I'll try and give you a very quick overview of that. First, we're talking about a very large area of land. And as has already been said, we saw a general shift of populations moving away from the large rivers to the west. There is a variety of climates there's flooding, drought, and there's a considerable instability of the rivers. And because of that, there was a constant reshuffling of human settlements. So that meant that there was a shift in the way people operated from an economic point of view, and it changed the way people lived. We went from pastoralist to mobile, pastoralist communities to semi-sedentary farming. And this continued right through to the emergence of the Elamid Empire and more traditional and more large-scale farming practices. And then we looked at the first millennium before the Christian era, we can observe the first irrigation systems at scale. When we focus in on the Shushtar farming plains, we can see this natural and cultural shift. On these maps, we can see how the water basin in Karun changed. This is the change we saw from the 6th to 4th millennium before the Christian era. And we can see the populations who were quite dispersed around the area predominantly focused the farming practices around flooding cycles, and predominantly with sheep and goats. And then in the 2nd millennium, through to the 1st millennium BCE. At the beginning of the 1st millennium AD, we can see canals already quite well developed in the area, and that changed the landscape. The second level of interaction is in terms of the urban landscape. In the Khuzestan region, there is a long-standing hydraulic system in place, which is now protected by UNESCO for its heritage relevance. We can see it here. There are two main water bodies that run around the outskirts of the city. You have the Karun River that you can see, and then you have the artificial canal, the Gargar, which you can see here on the right in dark blue. You also have the Daryun inflow canal, which was created by Darius, the Achaemenid king, again with a full set of networked canals that tied into the primary canal. In addition to that, there is key infrastructure, water infrastructure, that was created to manage the flow of water. This is a side view of the heritage water system with the lower levels of the houses in the region, which provided access to water either directly via the riverbanks or through the underground canals. One thing worth bearing in mind is that access to water was not at all democratic. To have direct access to water from the basement of the house, that meant that you were of a high economic standing in the community. That said, there were public basement grounds where other people were allowed to go to seek shelter from the sun, to rest, especially when it was 50 degrees outside, and that was for the more mid to low economic housing. All cities in Khuzestan face an interesting paradox. It's very arid above ground, but quite humid and quite wet underground, and that's because of the Karun River and all of its tributaries. Now, while that is said, water access is quite challenging. What we can see here is that there is a cliff face, a rocky cliff face in a rocky plateau. And what that means is that most water bodies going through the plain are actually below the level of cities. This was a problem that was solved in Shushtar thanks to a series of dams and bridges to hold the water back and put it on the same level as the agricultural land. There are some 50 water mills along the river as well to help manage that. Now, in terms of housing and homes, we can see that water was a key driver in the way homes were shaped, with water predominantly below ground. This provides a considerable level of autonomy for those people who had access to water below ground because that meant they were protected from conflict, from wars and the like. And because they had access to fresh water from the river and the stable temperature of the substrate of the soil, people were able to access to quite comfortable conditions below ground, even when it was 50 degrees outside above ground. When we look at the heat profile of these different subterranean underground areas, we can see the social importance of it all. And I can talk about this a little later during the discussion. But something we need to bear in mind here is that in the beginning of modernization of the cityscape, this created a number of sanitary and sanitation type issues because of the mix of living spaces with the underground spaces. This is a cross-section of a Sushta house with access right to the Gagar River with its various underground levels. Most homes usually only had 2 underground levels. And we can see the air catchment systems. Through this research, I tried to understand the way water was managed through the ancient periods in the Susian area. And the first main phase that we can see is a time that I've called the natural stage, which goes right from prehistoric times through to the 5th millennium BCE. At that time, there was very minimal human intervention. It was predominantly governed by natural phenomena, as we saw with riverbeds shifting, with flooding, that shaped the landscape. And that triggered movement of human populations. And that is why I talk of a waltz between people and rivers. It was an ongoing dance. It changed the way people lived. They had to be quite adaptive with mobile pastoralist practices, and it made people quite dependent on rainfall. This is still quite visible even today within nomadic populations. The Bartieri people, for example. Then, bit by bit, in the central region of Susian, we saw the advent of more long-term sedentary populations. But this settlement didn't take place in a linear pattern. In times of climate or environmental crisis, populations became more nomadic or more flexible. So through this transition phase, well, after the transition phase, we saw a more considerable level of human intervention, predominantly through the Sassanid era. In that time, we can really see how communities were having a huge impact on their local environment. They were trying to set in place riverbeds to stop them from changing. We saw a lot of water bureaucracy coming in as well in the Khuzestan region. So water management was much more in-depth, extensive. It could even be described. So water management during the period could be described as almost being feudalistic, capitalistic, legitimist, quite discriminatory. And it brings a lot of cultural identity aspects to it as well. To compare the different characteristics from the past to today, it leads to 3 key notions. First, there's the notion of scale, the proportional nature of constructions, the fact that there is no ecosystemic approach, and the way it is governed. Because this is a region which has unique environmental characteristics, it has a unique way of approaching water. And we can look at it from a political point of view, from an economic point of view. It's not just a sheer water management analysis from a technical point of view. We can look at it in all its aspects. So it's quite remarkable to look at this from the ancient Iran through to modern-day Iran. And it's quite similar to today when looking at water management practices because it's highly political, and we can see that bureaucracy is very present and quite dominant. To conclude, what people say as man's power over nature is more power of one man over another man using nature as its instrument. And that's to quote C.S. Lewis. Thank you very much.
Bonjour, my name is Adreja De. I'm from Sept University, India. I'm honored to be here today in Paris to present my final year architecture thesis, which is titled Brine, Belonging and Ephemeral Territories, Indigenous Salt Landscapes of the Indian Desert. My research demonstrates connections between indigenous knowledge systems of salt-producing communities on transforming landscapes through spatial practices. I have broken down my research into three main objectives. First, to document traditional salt production methods in Kutch in Gujarat and Sambar Lake in Rajasthan, India, which were my two main case studies. This helped me understand the ecological techniques and adaptations the communities use in salt production. Second, to study how the tangible and intangible attributes of salt production like materials, spatial layout, rituals, myths, and the environment influence the creation of ephemeral architecture, especially the temporary shelters built by salt farmers. Third, to explore how these communities engage in placemaking, how they claim, mark, and transform space through daily routines of seasonal migrations. To begin with, I read the relationship between humans and nature and how landscapes are not just empty spaces where people live, but they are shaped by how people interact with them over time. For salt-producing communities also, salt making is not just about earning a living, but it is connected to culture, tradition, and survival. To support this, I read theories of Tim Ingold and Martin Heidegger. Ingold says that landscapes are not just static backgrounds, they are dynamic and shaped by human actions. And Heidegger explains that true dwelling happens when people live in rhythm with the environment, not just by constructing permanent houses. In case of the salt workers, daily activities like walking between salt pans, building embankments, and setting up temporary shelters actually shape the land and create a lived space. To ground these theoretical ideas, I studied the historical and present-day realities of salt production in India. Salt has held cultural, economic, and political importance in India since the Indus Valley civilization, evolving from localized traditional methods to industrial-scale production. Gujarat today, with Kutch alone producing over 2.8 million tons annually, followed by Tamil Nadu and Rajasthan, including Sambar Lake. Having seen the wide-ranging importance of salt, it's essential to now shift our focus to the communities behind its production, those who live and work in harmony with these landscapes. My research talks about two communities, the Agarias of Kutch and salt farmers in Sambar Lake. They possess deep ecological knowledge and sustainable practices tied to their landscapes and follow distinct ways of life. Despite their resilience and expertise, these communities face a lot of challenges like water scarcity, poor sanitation, harsh living conditions, and health issues due to prolonged salt exposure. My first case study, the Little Run of Kutch, is located at the confluence of desert and sea. It was once a part of the Arabian Sea. Then it transformed into a seasonal salt desert after the 1819 earthquake, which altered river courses and elevated the land. This created a saline, rich, marshy terrain ideal for traditional solar salt production. Salt production here begins after the monsoon, when Agarias return to build temporary shelters, dig brine wells, and prepare evaporation pans using traditional wooden pumps. Over several months, the brine is solar evaporated, crystallized, and finally raked, heaped, sun-dried, and manually loaded for transport. This is the plan and section of an individual salt pan. And this is the layout inside their tent and how they build their temporary shelter. My second case study, Sambar Lake, is India's largest inland salt lake in eastern Rajasthan. It is a tectonic depression formed by crustal movements that created a natural basin in the Aravalli foothills. Here, the Sambar Salt Limited manages production using monsoon-fed surface lake water, which is stored and directed through interconnected evaporation pans until crystal form. Local monitors salinity, then manually rake, heap, and dry the salt, with tractors assisting in some areas before it is transported for processing. This is the plan and section of an individual salt pan. And this is the house of a salt farmer who lives in the village nearby that I documented. To understand how salt-producing communities engage with their environment, I identify tangible parameters such as housing, infrastructure, and boundaries, and intangible ones including cultural practices, traditions, and lived experience, drawing from Ingold and Heidegger. By intersecting these parameters, I examined how spatial practices and resource management shape each other. For example, the layout of shelters, pans, and pathways emerges from movement patterns and the need to optimize water and soil resources. This method was applied across all parameters to reveal how built form and culture continuously co-produce the landscape. Coming to our tangible parameters, in Kutch, communities rely on saline groundwater, while in Sambar, salt pans are laid along lake edges. In Kutch, the layout of the salt pans are scattered and the temporary shelters are aligned with salt pans and brine wells, while in Sambar, the settlements are more permanent with shaded courtyards. In Kutch, boundaries are defined through subtle temporary physical markers like stepping stones and personal items around salt pans, while in Sambar, boundaries are more formalized with mud walls and fences. In Kutch, the Agarias follow a semi-nomadic migration pattern. They leave the salt pans during the monsoon when the pans are flooded and return from October to May to set up temporary shelters. While in Sambar, migration is more stable as many workers live in nearby villages and have permanent infrastructure. In Kutch, Agaria shelters are constructed using lightweight, easily transportable materials like bamboo, plastic sheets, and jute sacks, while in Sambar, the materials used for shelters are more varied and semi-permanent like mud, stone, thatch, and baked bricks. Coming to the intangible parameters, Kutch and Sambar share remarkably similar intangible parameters. In both regions, salt farming is rooted in inherited knowledge passed down through generations, supported by communal labor and caste-based or family-based expertise. They both observe comparable taboos linked to deities, lunar phases, and the right moment to begin work, reflecting a spiritual relationship with the land. Both communities uphold values of resilience, cooperation, and environmental respect, reinforced through localized myths from Kutch ancestral teachings to Sambar's legend of goddess Shakambri. Daily rituals and seasonal blessings structure the salt cycle in both the landscapes. And resource management in each relies on traditional ecological intelligence that emphasizes water conservation, brine control, and collective decision-making. To conclude, this research shows that the landscapes of Kutch and Sambar are shaped not by isolated elements, but by an interwoven system of spatial, cultural, and ecological practices. What appear as simple shelters or temporary markers are in fact precise responses to climate, mobility, and tradition. Yet, when external interventions introduce permanent structures that ignore these rhythms, they risk disrupting the very systems that have sustained these communities for generations. The salt farmers' minimal collapsible homes reveal a profound ecological intelligence, one that occupies vast terrain yet leaves only a light footprint. Their way of dwelling challenges dominant architectural ideas of permanence and instead offer a lesson in adaptability, restraint, and coexistence. Ultimately, this work invites us as architects and researchers to rethink how we engage with fragile landscapes, not by imposing permanence, but by learning from the ephemeral sensibilities embedded in indigenous practice. Thank you very much.
Bonjour à tous, je m'appelle Samuel Niber, je suis
Good
architecte.
morning, everybody. I'm an architect, planner, and as you heard, I'm going to talk to you about an ecosystem, the ecosystem of oases in Morocco, and what we can learn from this 1,000-year-old system, which is agricultural, social, and how that can help us with our planning in semi-arid regions. This research began by observing just how important drought is in the current day in Morocco. It's been a major problem for several decades and has a big impact on the local economy, whether in terms of agriculture or water resources. In the summer of last year, when I began this work, the drought led to a number of measures aimed at closing down hammams, educational recommendations to reduce water consumption, for instance. So there's a lot of public debate about this notion of drought and the importance of water. So the crisis isn't recent. The crisis is something that goes back much further. And of course, it's all about management of water under the French protectorate. The French protectorate really changed the country's relationship with water. Water was considered to be a common good, something that was to be managed commonly, that gradually became a source of economic revenue that was extracted and used intensively. Under the protectorate, the French protectorate that is, the region, this is the Dra and the Ressus, based on the Californian method of the 1950s. This was to encourage agricultural colonies to set up there, to settle there, which led to a high-intensive agriculture like tomatoes, cherry tomatoes that we still find in French markets today, which are crops that consume a lot of water in a country where there is considerable drought at the moment. So, faced with this intensive agriculture, we have a technical solution which is called the construction of large dams since the 1930s, and that has been the policy of the Moroccan state for decades, one that continued after independence under Hassan II in the 70s. That's this policy of large dams. What we now realize that intensive agriculture is over 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions, which raises the whole question of the viability of this crop system and the way we manage our water resources. The drying up of water tables in Morocco has led us to review our current system, and in particular to look at the solutions available to us. These solutions have existed even in the desert and in the hydraulic infrastructure used for oases. So this system began back with the hydraulic infrastructure of centuries ago. For centuries, it actually defended against the desert. It was a defensive wall. Because of rural exodus and because of the lack of management of these desertified areas. So the idea behind this research consisted in thinking of the territory, in a certain way, and so revealing or showing how oases are in fact an infrastructure in themselves, conditioned by immaterial lines, travel, the caravans traveling, the nomadic movements, but infrastructures like the Anats and the Electorat and Fugara. If you look at the oasis in the territory, what we see is that there's a line of oasis. They follow a line, which you see in red here. They look like isolated dots in the country, but if you join them, what you find is a continuous line which is parallel to the Atlas mountain range. This line is actually an ecological boundary towards the south of the country. It's a market garden which prevents the desert invading these areas. The oases are kind of like nodes forming a constellation of market gardening sites, giving us a whole network defending the oasis against desertification. So the oases are connected to stabilize soil and to contain the advance of the desert. This works in parallel with or runs parallel to the Atlas mountain range, which prevents shifting sands, and it prevents and of course protects the fertile lands in the north and south of the Atlas. Okay, come back to the start. This all begins with dates. Dates, the fruit. It came from the Middle East, from the fertile crescent, as it was called back in antiquity. So the date palms, when we look at the date palms, we see that there's a correspondence between these two environments. What we've observed is oasis with the date palms mainly exist in arid regions because of the fruit itself, because of the fact that dates that were brought in for thousands of years by nomads who had crossed North Africa and brought in dates, when the whole know-how that went with these dates and palm dates. It's the idea of managing oases as a form of infrastructure. In our collective imagination, an oasis is something that almost exists so spontaneously, or that appears in the middle of the desert. In fact, it's anything but that. The oasis is not a natural resurgence. It's an agricultural artifact that has been built by man. It involves working the land, and it involves constant maintenance. This is based on an agroforestry system revolving around the palm tree. This is a little like a bocage which surrounds agricultural land and creates a microclimate because of the shade it creates, to provide us with diversified agriculture below the canopy, and of course its roots retain the soil to avoid soil erosion. This system provides us with a productive environment despite the aridity of the desert. What palms also do is they give us an economy with the production of dates, which is one of the backbones of the very economy of oasis. But this economy is now challenged. Only a small percentage of the date production is still operational. What we find that the 20 million tons of soil are disappearing, and the Sahara is advancing by tens, if not hundreds of kilometers every year. Now, an oasis is a system of interdependence between water and the palm dates. Water enables us to irrigate the crops. The palm grove will give us sufficient economic resources to build settlements and to have human beings present to work the land. If any of these elements is weakened, then the whole system is weakened. But this systemic fragility is now in evidence in Morocco. So each oasis will depend on its relationship with water and its relationship with the mountain. If you look at the Marrakesh oasis or Skola oasis, these two oases drain water from foothills and mountains. This is a network of wells 10 meters apart, which harnesses water coming down from the mountains. There's a very slight slope of about 2 degrees from the foothills. So these wells are evidence of human presence and the importance of human beings maintaining the oasis. They have to be maintained. The oases in the foothills tend to turn rivers through siglia. These are channels that deviate water with splitters or underwater galleries that even when the riverbed is dry, this deviation of water enables us to irrigate the palm groves. Their efficiency also requires regular maintenance, absolutely indispensable to avoid mud accumulation. The problem is that these infrastructures, which are thousands of years old, that have enabled oases to be built and maintained, I think the problem is that with our modern intensive agriculture and rapid urbanization, this common good has become a resource which weakens the whole oasis system. The Marrakesh oasis is the first case I want to talk about, which is a good illustration of this radical transformation. For those of you who know Marrakesh, it's a city in the south of Morocco, but historically Marrakesh was an oasis at the foot of the Atlas Mountains. Originally, all we had was the palm grove. We had villages. The only thing remaining, the only ruins or the remainder of that period is the palm grove in Marrakesh, which is gradually disappearing because of urban development and particularly the development of tourist infrastructures, particularly hotels, large hotels. Historically, Marrakesh is a green city. It's a city of palm groves and gardens. And if you look at these photographs, you see that it's very hard to recognize that. Since the Protectorate, the ville has extended over beyond the bulwarks in the northwest. It's a kind of a green belt around Morocco. The colonial district has gradually encroached on the green belt. The quota of the green belt has been decreased from 60 square meters to 2 square meters per inhabitant in the space of 100 years. Since the 1980s, in the popular areas, vegetation does not figure in urban planning and now represents less than 2% of the planned urban area. So the paradox is that the green has become red, the flourishing landscape has become increasingly arid and artificial. These palm groves are disappearing one after the other. Over 4,000 hectares have disappeared because of urban development since the 1980s. This is because of the commercial aspect of Marrakesh. From a green city, we have an ochre-colored city, the red city, which is the current name of Marrakesh. This is because of the hue in the walls. In Morocco really wants it to be a tourist destination, an exotic tourist destination, even to the detriment of the real components. The palm grove has now become a major attraction for Marrakesh, but the green gardens of the hotels have mostly dried up the main oasis because it's drawing on hydraulic sources that are already precarious. So the urbanism is now disconnected from the local topological reality. It used to be that the backbone of this was the villages, the doual, which maintained the soil, maintained the palm groves. This actually fed the whole city of Marrakesh. Now, the palm grove can't even provide for the local people. They've been expropriated to build hotels. Some of them have actually left the villages of their own accord. So the story of the palm grove is a story of hydraulics. Paradoxically, oases were in arid areas. It's because there were hydraulic companies that knew how to deviate water to support their own needs. Now, Marrakesh was built because of this network that you see in blue, which harnessed water coming from the mountains and foothills, generating a real matrix around Marrakesh. This network, hydraulic network, has become obsolete and is increasingly overlooked. This is one of the main regions that this green infrastructure is disappearing. But the reasons that this water is being used for is not just bridges. Every district had its old basin and fountain to distribute water to the local hammam or for different people but it was much more than that. This is where people congregated. This is where people met and lived. People managed their resources collectively. And water was managed on the basis of the ajmar, which is the collectivity. This was a group of elders who met every Friday after prayer to guarantee that water was shared fairly. The disappearance of this type of governance since the Protectorate has become one of the main factors behind the disappearance of the oasis. As I said earlier on, an oasis is built around and for a community. It's a landscape that, if not managed, if not shared, will gradually disappear. This fragmentation of the landscape reminds me of another Aïd Ben Haddou, which is situated 200 kilometers from Marrakesh, about 120 miles across the Atlas. This particular oasis depends entirely on its segia. These are channels that deviate water from the river, and this the river itself is fragile and unforeseeable. There's the fact that rainfall is unpredictable and the water is increasingly saline. This, of course, makes it much more complicated to use these segia. Here we have a few palm groves in the region, and the drought in the 60s and 70s really accelerated the decline of these oases, as a result of which populations left the village. There was no longer any date production, so the local economy collapsed. This activity no longer meets the requirements of the population who have to leave the village to go and live or work in Marrakesh or Ouarzazate. This same oasis have also had to deal with the change of governance that I explained, the building of a dam, a very big dam here between Ouarzazate and the Squala oasis. This is one of these large hydraulic infrastructures aimed at regulating irrigation in the valley. It extends the amount of land that can be cultivated. Communities at a certain amount of time. This actually disrupted the work of the water tables and the natural fertilization of the soil, so has actually accelerated the desertification of the valley. In compensation, the only solution is motorized pumps, which again disrupts things because everything is done on a more irrational and individual way, again tapping resources irrationally. If I can come back to the trilogy of oasis, habitat and palm groves, it's the habitats that are in danger here. This is a village that was built around the river, around this former citadel, a czar, or a fort, if you like, which is completely abandoned. It was initially built for defense and has no longer any reason to be, but the flooding in 1989 drove the inhabitants out of the old village and led them to create a new village around the road. But when they left the former citadel, when they left the river, they abandoned the palm groves and the underlying agriculture. So the Czar is now in ruin. It was included in the UNESCO's World Heritage. That's a very long ago. It's used to shoot films like the Game of Thrones or Gladiator. But this tourist success story is a dilemma. Is it just to become a picturesque artifact and in doing so lose its role as a defensive bulwark? So the inhabitants of the village have not gone back. They prefer to stay on the other side of the river, closer to the road, and they've transformed their former habitats into shops. And this is a desertified village on the other side of the river around the fortress. The postcard is one of a desert, as you saw in previous photographs. So what you tourists take away is the fact that it's dried up with, rather than have the flourishing agriculture that did exist in the palm grove beforehand. But the tourism that this has brought about is not structured. There are tensions, and very often managed by foreign investors. It does not generate any economic revenue really for the community. There's also a gap between what tourists imagine coming looking for exoticism, genuineness, and of course the aspirations of local inhabitants who want modernity that they find incompatible with their traditions. So they're inclined to turn towards materials imported from abroad and new techniques that they find more appropriate to modern times. So agricultural and architectural techniques, the older ones, are gradually disappearing, and materials like concrete, which is now the prevalent material in the valley, are gradually replacing traditional materials. By way of conclusion, what can we learn from these two oases, the rural and city oasis? Well, they've simply become tourist artifacts disconnected from the productive agricultural reality of the past. So, with the 2030 World Cup on the horizon, Morocco would like to project its image internationally, like to showcase this culture and taking on global significance. So really the question is, what image does Morocco want to give of its infrastructure? Are there to be picturesque artifacts for tourists, or are they to become or re-become productive agricultural infrastructure? So I think we need to leave behind colonialism, ideologies that have marginalized these places. The revitalization of these oases has to be much more than putting them on a stage. It involves reactivating their agricultural functions, which are essential to the resilience of the territory. So, faced with urban sprawl, it's important to realize that these systems are infrastructures. Water is a common good, and I think you have to think of time and temporality as a condition for managing water collectively. Agroforestry systems, unlike intensive agriculture that we have now, particularly monoculture. So I think we need to reconcile the different paradoxes. This is, I think, the way forward. We mustn't glorify this nostalgia. We must reconcile production and tourism. We must reconcile preservation and development, and become once again productive in our regions. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I'm delighted to be here and to listen to all these fascinating presentations. I thank the organizers for this. So as we have seen in India, 90% of the rain falls during the 2-3 months of the year. And this inevitably requires highly advanced water management techniques. Today, unfortunately, mostly destroyed or abandoned. So I discovered the tradition of water management in Western India during my exchange program at CEPT, Center for Environmental Planning and Technology in Ahmedabad, when I was a master's student in architecture at Paris Belleville. And a book inspired me a lot, this book, a book written by Gandhian activist and environmentalist Anupam Mishra, called The Radiant Raindrops of Rajasthan, which was first translated from Hindi into French by Annie Moto before it got translated into English. And it inspired me a lot for my master's degree. Today, so I'll speak mainly about the need to bring awareness on this subject to the young generation, and particularly students in architecture. How to form future architects and professionals to value these structures, to study them, learn from them, and in the process, awaken their imagination. For this, I will base my presentation on a research project that we initiated with colleagues at the School of Architecture in Toulouse, where I teach, that questioned the role of traditional water devices and systems, mostly abandoned today, in the urban development of Jaipur, situated in the region of Rajasthan in western India at the edge of the Thar Desert. We called the research program Jaipur 2035, Rainwater Harvesting and Metropolization. It won the Eco-Century project proposed and launched by the Fondation Braillard architects in Geneva. And workshops were held in Amber, in Jaipur, and in Bundi also for 3 years between 2018 and 2020 with students. So we had 5 to 10 students from Toulouse and 15 to 30, sometimes 40 students from Jaipur and Mumbai. It varied according to the years. And we spent 2-3 weeks each year on site. Some students also managed to organize their exchange programs around the study, and we had 2 students each year going to Jaipur and a dozen of students from Jaipur and Mumbai coming to Toulouse. So dissertations were written, projects were designed, and even a thesis was defended on the subject. And these were mainly around questions related to traditional rainwater harvesting devices and water systems, the putting into function and modernization of these structures and infrastructures, and lastly, the possible integration of these existing networks in new studies and projects. So, what are the methodologies necessary to study this kind of subject? And what are the tools required? How to demonstrate the educational value of fieldwork? So I will try and answer these questions by organizing my presentation in 3 parts. I'll begin by presenting the value of a holistic approach enabled by fieldwork, particularly necessary when studying these hydraulic structures and systems. Secondly, I will present the various tools used to carry out fieldwork in relation to the specific characteristics of the study. And finally, to conclude, I will briefly discuss the results and limitations of the exercise. So, like this map we see here of Bundi, you'll be seeing pictures of the students' drawings, the drawings they did on site to accompany. So you'll see these pictures to accompany my presentation. However, I will unfortunately not have time to comment each picture, but we may speak about them later in the discussions. So the first question that can be asked is, why go so far? Is there any need to travel so far? Can this displacement, seeing what is happening elsewhere, facilitate the awareness of what is happening at home? The need for what we call in French le regard perçant, or the Persian view that dates back to Montesquieu's letters, can be the opportunity to see one's culture through different lenses or points of view. And this détour is essential to better know one's own culture and learn to see what resembles and distinguishes it from the others. India has developed the art of water management to a very high degree, and so it is probably one of the best places to learn it and learn from it. Second, the need for direct contact. It is impossible to perceive a space from a distance, and a complete and tangible experience can only be had on site by engaging all the senses: sight, touch, hearing, smell. It means immersing oneself completely in a specific site with its dimensions, its culture, its climate, its language. And I'm convinced that one can grasp a place only by walking and surveying it. And the fieldwork we did in Rajasthan allowed students to take a closer look at a very complex hydraulic system, as well as its use and appropriation. So we see here the same place in Bundi seen from two different angles, and they are quite different. So the importance to grasp the political, social, and economic realities of the context was necessary by reading books, articles, but also through interactions with the people on site, living there, as we believe it is not just the houses or the urban structure that make a city, but the persons who live in them, use them, and invest them. And we've seen examples today, this morning, of this investment that can still be possible. Interactions were organized with local authorities, researchers, teachers, inhabitants. Every evening we would organize presentations by experts in fields related to Rajasthan's water networks, as well as on more general topics concerning the urban history of Indian cities. Students presented their work during these evenings, which allowed for open discussions, debates, exchange of knowledge, viewpoints, different reflections on the city and water management in the city. And it makes me think about Alberto Magnani and Daniela Poli, who speak about fieldwork and who say that the students, through their interest on a subject, become drivers of reflection and action at the local level. And it is true that these workshops, in a very small way, but they led the way to discovering, or maybe also rediscovering, this water system through the eyes of the other. Indirectly, one restores value to a system and a skill set that seems abandoned and no longer of interest. This reminds us how in the social sciences, the investigator's perspective transforms the way things are seen. And Bow and Weber speak about this in their book on fieldwork. Introducing the perspective, and I will quote them, they say, fieldwork amounts to doing justice to or even rehabilitating practices that are ignored, misunderstood, or despised. And so here we see a stepwell in Bundi that is a garbage pit, literally. And it was very interesting to see the beautiful drawings that came out of these workshops. So before visiting the site, the students spent an entire semester preparing fieldwork by consulting books, maps, archives on the cultural, historical, topographical, political topics. And once on site, map in hand, they could confirm certain issues or point to the alterations on site due to urbanization. Study also the rainfall data and the difference in time. Students observed the terrain by drawing, sketching, and measuring it. The investigation proceeded from the general to the detailed, then back to the whole. And this play on scales was constant in order to fully understand the logic behind the articulations of all the different parts of the hydraulic system. And moving around the space allowed them to realize the scale, the extent of a watershed, for example. Transcribing this spatial experience onto a two-dimensional document allows architects to understand it and gain a contextualized and synthetic view of it. And here I will quote Jacques Frédé, who says, "The time spent drawing familiarizes and facilitators memorization, reflection, and step-by-step discovery of the logic of forms and their material composition, which is the basis of the imagination necessary for the project." Drawing is a gentle way of entering in a site and interacting with those who inhabit and shape the site. And there is a landscape architect, Alexis Pernet, who speaks about this and who asks if the future of landscape is not determined by the care we take in observing, understanding and perceiving them, these landscapes, as places of dialogue. According to him, the sketchbook, a modest technology, I quote him, does not merely record past experiences, but marks the beginning of a journey that questions both history and the sometimes complex transformations that await the landscape. For the students, measured drawings, relevés in French, was a way to gain a deep knowledge and understanding of the water system. Actually, the practice of measured drawing is a way to sharpen one's vision. I know an architect, Laurent Fournier, who is a prolific builder in India, and who says that he does at least one measured drawing per year. For him, it is like doing regular yoga exercise. It maintains his mental, his visual, and architectural agility. It is a lesson in humility also, in front of an old structure, still standing, and that has lessons to transmit. Measure drawings is a language, an architectural language that proposes a synthetic, immediate, analytical vision of the structure. It sheds lights on the spatial, but also the constructive, technical aspects, or even the pathologies that can be present. It shows the different layers, historical layers that underlies the structure, like a palimpsest. And it can even be a way to familiarize with the units of measurements that were used to construct these structures. When we draw from measurements, we have to select what will be drawn and measured. This conscious choice is important. It compels one to not be exhaustive, to not replicate everything, but to identify only what is important for the study. And according to Philippe Boudon, and I quote him, a model that completely replicates reality provides no insight. So these measured drawings, this selection to draw one thing and not another, was a kind of interpretation. It was a way to distinguish one aspect from another, to prioritize and differentiate between what is primary and what is secondary. And it was for the students a working tool for research, as it defined the intentions that stand behind the research question also that underlie the study. And it unveiled also the subjectivity, the subjective view of each student, each author. So finally, I would like to point out the issues that emerged out of these workshops and the lessons learned. I should say that students have been eye-openers. Knowledge is created through these workshops. It comforts us with the idea that knowledge is not static. It is continuously updated. And workshops like these are occasions to new findings, new drawings, new discoveries, actually mostly rediscoveries. And this knowledge is alive, not only to be stored in books and labs, but a living knowledge that is operational, concrete, and real. We all learned, students, local and foreign students, but also teachers, inhabitants. These workshops are a joint venture to discover a territory and the different structures and systems in place to landscape this water harvesting we studied. The study shows that rainwater was collected at several different levels at the top of ridges, and we saw fortified ridges, forts that had their water tanks that were supplied by channels located at the top of the hills. On the slopes of these same hills, where water is directed towards large and natural artificial lakes and into the ground to recharge the water table. And also at the bottom of these watersheds were dug wells, step wells, basins that are recharged more by percolation. So master's dissertations and final year projects studied the mechanisms. They compared them with those found in other arid or semi-arid regions of the world. Some students counted the number of drops or number of liters that could be stored in the different devices. Pollution also was one of the topics. Some tackled the problems linked to domestic and industrial wastewater and imagined ways to purify, natural ways to treat these waters. We had also students proposing a typological study of, here we see of bouleys. They were studied individually but also compared with each other. Here are the different shapes and the different orientations of these step wells. Here we see a tank that uses the slope of the hill as a wall to simplify and reduce the cost in construction. Studies were also done on materials, their implementations, and the means of restoring these structures. We had a student who was a stonemason before joining architecture, and so he got interested in these questions. Maybe one of the most striking lessons from these structures is to discover a sophisticated infrastructure. This is a dam, actually, that invites human interactions. Its function as a dam does not prevent the structure to look. It looks more like a garden palace, and this is where local people from Jaipur come to spend time. And so we move away from the functionalist thinkings and logics and come back to something that is more related and situated. And it reminds me of the close relation that Carlo Cataneo develops between science and the arts as forms of projection of the human mind into the concrete world. A link that connects the countryside and the city. Carlo Cataneo does not distinguish between city and countryside in the sense that all inhabited places are the work of men, and people before me today have spoken about this. Each region, and so I quote him, it's a quotation I got in Aldo Rossi's book, The Architecture of the City. So I quote, "Each region differs from the wilderness in that it is an immense receptacle of labor. And this land is therefore not, for 9/10 of it, the work of nature. It is the work of our hands. It is an artificial homeland." And so this living structure that offers more than what its function demands, which is to retain water, gives sense, gives identity to a place, and it reminds me also of the bridge of the Khaju Bridge in Isfahan, that is still so lively and filled with people every evening, people that gather there, even though the river underneath does not flow anymore. And the bridge serves as a pretext to elaborate on an architecture that is used, appropriated, and that brings people together. Water is no more but the soul that is infused in these structures and renders the matter living. More than the problem of scarcity and aridity is maybe the problem of pollution of water. It's a worse and maybe a deeper problem that has to be tackled. And because of the degradation of the landscape capacity to store and purify water, but that's another issue. Fieldwork allowed for constant interaction between all these heritage structures and all areas of society. And we believe, like Havari Barbas, that heritage is no longer a clearly defined field reserved for specialists alone, but one that is open to cross-disciplinary approaches. And with the past constantly being redefined and operationalized to meet more appropriate future needs, the question is, can these urban structures be reintegrated into the cultural imagination and become part of a living heritage that promotes, in Appadurai's words, the sense of culture as a capacity for aspiration? Thank you.